You're always a day away. Tomorrow. Oh my god, hey, welcome back to my theatre-themed YouTube channel. My name is Mickey Joe and I am obsessed with all things theatre. And just last night, I was invited to go and review the new UK tour of the musical Annie at the New Victoria Theatre in Woking. This production of the show is directed by Nikolai Foster with choreography from Nick Winston and stars Craig Revel Horwood as the villainous Miss Hannigan. Craig was previously sharing the role with other performers, including the late, wonderful Paul O'Grady, who was meant to be appearing on this tour as well, but sadly passed away very early into the run. So in today's new video, I'm going to be letting you know what I thought of this production. How were the cast? Who was the standout performer for me? And what other West End musical do I think they might have taken a little bit of inspiration from? Stay tuned to find out the answers to all of those questions. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to subscribe to my theatre-themed YouTube channel for many more reviews. Literally, just so many reviews, as well as a bunch of other stagey content. Now, let's talk about Annie. That's how Craig says it, that's not me. Annie. Let's talk about Annie. So if you know nothing about Annie, it's the story of a young orphan who believes that her parents are coming back to get her because of a locket that she was left with when she was left at the orphanage. The orphanage which is run by the cruel and neglectful Miss Hannigan. After an unsuccessful escape attempt during which she meets a dog which she names Sandy, Annie is chosen to go and stay with the billionaire Daddy Warbucks for 2 weeks in his mansion. And after winning over the workaholic with her charm and unfailing optimism, the two of them soon become inseparable. But when Miss Hannigan finds out that Daddy Warbucks plans to officially adopt Annie, she grows so jealous and resentful of the comfortable life that Annie would go on to live that she hatches a plan to ruin all of that with her brother Rooster. And this all sounds very plucky and family and cartoonish, but there is actually a turbulent political undercurrent going on with Annie, which is not really explored, but it is referenced. So it's set under the presidency of Franklin D. Roosevelt in the years after the Wall Street crash, and over the course of the show, both we and Annie get to experience two different sides of New York. We see the flashy and rich Manhattan that Daddy Warbucks shows to Annie, but previously to this, she's found herself in the middle of a sort of a shanty town and a soup kitchen filled with homeless and unemployed Americans. The plot eventually brings Annie face to face with the President of the United States, and once again, her optimism convinces him that there is a way through this crisis. You might be thinking this all sounds like a slightly strange route for this show to take, and it's because Annie as a character has her roots in political cartoons. It is an incredibly well put together musical with a book by Thomas Meehan and a score with music by Charles Strauss and lyrics by Martin Sharnin. And I always find myself forgetting just how many great songs there are in Annie. You remember Tomorrow, and you remember It's a Hard Knock Life, and Little Girls, and then you have Easy Street, and you have Something Was Missing, and Anything But You, and NYC, and You're Never Fully Dressed Without a Smile. There are so many great songs in this show, and the score is written with the same enduring charm and buoyant positivity with which Annie herself is characterized. Even as she faces these increasingly dark situations, she remains steadfastly optimistic, and so too does the music. But how does this particular production handle all of this and bring all of these difficult themes together? Let's find out. So first of all, I want to talk briefly about the design, which is not something I usually start with, but this production came about in the years after Matilda became a huge success in the West End, and I do think that they have drawn on this for aesthetic inspiration to a certain extent. Where Matilda has this sort of Scrabble tile effect of letters all around the proscenium, Annie does a similar thing with jigsaw puzzle pieces, some of which are made to look like New York traffic signs, but outside of that we don't really get much of a sense of Manhattan. It's one of the many ways in which this production feels a little bit more juvenile. It feels like an Annie that you're reading in a storybook that has been designed for a child audience and for a family audience, rather than a sophisticated book musical that happens to contain younger characters. And perhaps it's controversial for me to say this, but I don't think Annie is strictly a family show. I think this is a show with themes and ideas that speak to all ages and are actually, like I said, very sophisticated. But over time, and certainly with this production and its casting, it has geared itself more towards a family audience, which is a lucrative audience to cater to in the theatre, let's be honest. And I do enjoy the set and costume design, which are by Colin Richmond with lighting from Ben Cracknell. I like the whimsy of them, but it does definitely put us in this sort of a fantasy realm where it doesn't feel starkly real, even when Annie wanders into these very bleak settings, faced with homelessness and faced with poverty and unemployment. It feels like the Roald Dahl version of that, the David Walliams version of that. The way Miss Hannigan's office is laid out, with these furniture pieces with a safe stacked on top of sort of a wobbly pile of mess, and it's filled with bottles of gin, it's just a little bit cartoonish. It's not particularly real. Now, like I said, Nikolai Foster has directed this version of the show, and I think it's incredibly pacey and incredibly punchy, and it moves very quickly. We never get bored with this direction, but that is a choice that comes with a price, because I do feel we lose just a little bit of the sincerity and heart from some of the moments, because we do just bulldoze through some of these book scenes and some of these wonderful heartwarming moments. The part of the show where Annie calls out to Sandy and he runs towards her unexpectedly, even though that's a name that she's just given him. Those early scenes between Annie and Daddy Warbucks, where he goes from being indifferent about having an orphan around to genuinely coming to love her. Every time that we begin to approach any kind of a moment of sadness, we don't dwell on it nearly long enough. And what I think it's missing is that Disney formula of letting audiences get really sad about something before bringing it back to an ultimately uplifting place. This production just bucks up in the face of any kind of adversity, and Annie herself is so quick to just say, well, it's fine, it's all going to be okay, which is in her nature, but I do think that we should let it indulge in those moments of darkness just for a little bit longer. Otherwise, the happiness of the show's conclusion isn't as bright by comparison. And this cartoonish design element that I spoke about before kind of transcends through every layer of the show, and it is both directed and choreographed with a level of cartoonish absurdity. These don't feel like real people, there doesn't feel like any kind of real threat or poverty going on in the background of this production. The ensemble dance with the same energy in both We'd Like to Thank You Herbert Hoover, in which they're resentfully singing about unemployment, and NYC, in which they're celebrating the glamour of the city. They're just wearing different coats in those two numbers, otherwise it's much the same. I think inherently, if you have these people who are in a soup kitchen huddling for warmth and stealing coal for fires, like it says in the lyrics of the song, they shouldn't be performing a kind of a kick line. Even if it's meant to be a sort of an ironic and tongue-in-cheek kick line, they just ought not to have that much energy in the first place. Similarly, I think the way that some of the orphans are choreographed lacks a little bit of juvenile charm. It just lacks a little bit of whimsy. But overall, the biggest issue of all of this is when we get to the White House and when we have those political scenes, because everyone does by this point feel cartoonish and a little bit silly and a little bit insincere. It becomes very difficult to take the political element of the show with any kind of seriousness. But the balance to all of this is that it is an incredible pace that this show manages to achieve, and we get great number after great scene after great dance routine, and if you're just going there for this level of entertainment and enjoyment and you're not looking to take this show particularly seriously, then you're going to have a fantastic time. It all depends on how you view this production. Do you think Annie is actually a deceptively clever and sophisticated story with important themes that need to be evoked, or do you view it more as this charming and light-hearted family show? Because honestly, I think both are valid, and it definitely leans more into achieving this one thing than the other. I have one more element I want to talk to you about, which is the music. So Joshua Griffith was the music director and George Dyer was the orchestrator and musical supervisor. And I don't know if there were offstage vocals happening during the orphan numbers, but it was a very impressive wall of sound that we were hit with. The music throughout was much like the show. It was dynamic and punchy and strong and pacey. My one issue with this is the song Tomorrow, the most iconic song in the show, right? And I'm not even exaggerating when I tell you that this was probably conducted at 1.5 times the speed I thought it ought to have been. I didn't particularly love the orchestrations of it either, I'm sorry to say. That same thing that made the rest of the song sound dynamic and punchy and jazzy and robust, I wanted a softness and a wistfulness and a dreamlike quality in Tomorrow that I didn't really get. It was a little too marching band and far, far too fast. Where I wanted, when I'm stuck with a day that's grey and lonely, I got when I'm stuck with a day that's grey and lonely, I just stick up my chin, bum, and grin, bum, and say bum, bam, bum, bam, oh, bum, bam, bum, bam, the sun'll come out, tomorrow, bam. Too fast. Far too fast for us to feel any kind of real vulnerability in that moment. Maybe they had a curfew because there were so many child actors on stage and they needed to get through the show as quickly as possible. I don't know, but that annoyed me. I'm going to carry on now and I'm going to tell you about the wonderful performances. So Harley Barthram played Annie at this performance. She's one of 3 young actresses sharing this role. She was fantastic, hugely endearing and charming, and it's an awful lot of material that she has to lead the show with. She gave a wonderful performance, vocally astonishing and powerful, with such a sweetness to her voice. I think she has a very bright career ahead of her, and I really celebrate this show in deliberately casting young actresses of colour to play this role in an industry where child actors of colour don't usually get these kinds of opportunities. The rest of the orphans were also fantastic and adorable and spirited and feisty and just wonderful. I'm also absolutely not going to leave out Boris the dog, who played Sandy, and who I wanted to personally give a round of applause to every time they crossed the stage. Wonderful work from Boris the canine actor. But now I need to tell you about the other star of this show, because even though it's called Annie, it is also about Miss Hannigan, and Craig Revel Horwood did a fantastic job. The thing I love about Craig on stage is that he commits wholeheartedly. It's not a tongue-in-cheek performance. He's not winking to the audience and kind of nudging them about the fact that he's Craig Revel Horwood and playing on his own celebrity like you might get in a pantomime. He disappears completely into this character. There is a very specific New York character accent. The malevolent chemistry with the orphans is on point. The body language. He's very comfortable in heels. Dancing in heels really shines when he's dancing, which is of no surprise to anyone. Being a judge on Strictly Come Dancing, having had such an exciting dance career, but particularly in the reprise of the song Easy Street to do like the chaîné turns into the layout. It's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. There are moments where, like the rest of this production, I want for Craig's Miss Hannigan to have just a little bit more depth, because it's all very flashy and all very exuberant and raunchy and suggestive, but we don't get that little glimmer of darkness that lies beneath the surface. For all of her indignance and protestations, we don't get much of the humanity of Miss Hannigan. That being said, Craig delivers vocals and comedy and characterization thoroughly. Alongside Craig, reprising his role as Daddy Warbucks is Alex Bourne, who not only has this booming and wonderful theatrical voice, and it's a brilliant Daddy Warbucks characterization because we can tell that he's impatient and he's stubborn and he softens throughout the show, but in a believable way where he retains a little bit of that dignity and this sense of being in charge and having expectations. But the most brilliant thing about his performance is the way that he connects to Annie, to the young actress playing Annie. He is so believably won over by her, he is so utterly charmed, and his performance of the song Something Was Missing, far and away the emotional highlight of the show. This gets all of the reverence and the stillness and the pathos that Tomorrow wasn't quite afforded at the beginning. Not only that, but he sings it triumphantly. At the right hand of Daddy Warbucks is his assistant Grace Farrell, who is played enchantingly by Amelia Adams. Hers is a lovely performance. She's just that little bit sassy with Miss Hannigan when she needs to be, but she's also just sweetness and charm and delight personified. She carries herself with such a poise and an elegance. She instantly has this believable maternal bond with Annie and that perfect unspoken chemistry thing with Daddy Warbucks that doesn't feel like he's taking any sort of a professional advantage, but there's this sort of thing between them. Very difficult to get that right, and it's played very well. Meanwhile, we have a very different characterization from Billie Kay as Lily St. Regis. This is a great role. I mean, so many wonderful actresses have played this supporting female role in the show. Bernadette Peters and Kristen Chenoweth have played it on screen. It's a lovely, silly, over-the-top part. I love the way that she executes this choreography. She's a fantastic dancer. I've seen her dance before. I love how raunchy she is with it. I love the way that she plays this nervousness towards the end of the show when she's pretending to be Annie's mother as part of a scheme to try and get some money fraudulently. I think she's just terrific. And I have saved my absolute favourite performance for last, because Paul French plays Rooster, the boyfriend of Lily St. Regis, the brother of Miss Hannigan, and the main driving force behind this villainous scheme in the second act. Paul is just remarkable. I've seen him on stage a couple times now, and I think he's this tremendous rising star. He has a little touch of the Marlon Brandos about him, and I've mostly seen him play these sort of very serious, or trying to be serious, sort of sullen characters. He was the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz, he was Kaniki in Grease, and he is having so much fun here. He comes to such exuberant, chaotic life as Rooster. I have never seen Annie before in which Rooster completely steals the production, but his is such a fantastic performance. I never wanted Easy Street to end. I will add to this that Easy Street was my favourite part of the show because of these three coming together, because he had this wonderful chemistry with Billy as Lily and with Craig as Miss Hannigan. The three of them were such a fun and wicked and delicious trio. I like that this production in its direction foreshadows the arrival of Rooster and Lily by putting them on so many of the streets of New York scenes, and you see them clearly very seedy, wandering around town together looking very lascivious, so that by the time the two of them arrive, they are set up perfectly. He makes some wonderful character choices as well, and he perpetrates this kind of a manic villainy that harkens back to a lot of like old movie musical villains. That's what it made me think of. When he's lying about taking Annie away to a pig farm and he's squatting down to her level and just like grunting in her face. It's this very strange but very funny moment, and he delivers it so well. But it's the slickness and the suaveness of his characterization as well. The way he can effortlessly flip a hat onto his head. He is so at home in this role. You can absolutely tell it's such a great fit for him. So I think this is a perfect show for family audiences to go to. If you have kids that enjoy musical theatre and you want to expose them to more musical theatre, there's so much for them to love on the stage. You have children winning the day and fighting back. You have these great songs that are going to get stuck in their heads like earworms. You've got a dog on stage. You've got these villains that they can boo about. It's all very bright, very colourful. But having now seen this production, I do also think that there is a lot to enjoy for adult theatre goers here as well. Don't assume that this is just a production for kids. Yes, there are moments of darkness and depth and gravity and seriousness that they could indulge in a little bit more to make it more of a well-rounded production, but still, the dance is gorgeous. The performances are layered and clever and brilliant. It sounds great, it looks great, and it will leave you with a smile on your face. And ultimately, that's what a lot of people want when they go to the theatre. If that sounds like you, make sure to check out the tour dates and book tickets when Annie comes to a city near you. Thank you so much for watching today's review. Those have been my thoughts all about the Annie UK tour. Let me know if you have seen this tour already or if you're planning to see it later in its run. Also, let me know if you've seen Annie on stage before. What did you think of the show and of that production? If you enjoyed today's review video, make sure to subscribe to my theatre-themed YouTube channel for many more coming very soon. I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day.
For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Joe Theatre. Oh my god, hey, thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!